Welcome to VIR. This is another class in our series of trackside classrooms, which we're now doing on YouTube in advance of events so that you can review them at your leisure. And we hope to have classroom sessions at VIR where you can ask questions about this material or anything else. Today's class is oriented for students, although obviously all drivers can benefit from being more consistent, because today's topic is indeed consistency. And consistency is something I'm sure that your instructor has talked to you about many, many times. And if they haven't talked to you about it, I would imagine that you've at least picked up on pieces of it. But with all that said, let's dive right in, because this is a really important topic. To begin, our normal disclaimer that while we're providing what we think is good information, what you do with it is your responsibility. What we're going to talk about today is a quick reminder for those of you, especially for those of you who are new to driver's ed, a quick review of the basics. But then we're going to focus on consistency. We're going to define what it is, why it's important, and most importantly, how you can get better at it. And then after we talk about consistency, we'll do a turn-by-turn of VIR. Now, a quick review of the basics and some terms here. We all know that the line is the path that we drive around the track. And that line, when we're teaching especially, we tend to talk about some basic reference points, starting with where do we brake, then where do we turn in, and normally marked with a cone, where do we apex or hit the inside part of the track, and then where do we track out on the outside of the track. Now, I mentioned cones here. I do want to make one VIR specific comment. We hope to have turn in and apex cones at VIR. We frequently don't have time to get the track out cones out. So if you don't see a cone at track out, no worries. That is the least important one. But in all cases, your instructor will work with you on that. And as I'm going to point out later, cones are nice beginner aids, but as you get better, you want to rely on other reference points besides the cones. And of course, when we're driving, there's a rhythm to it. As we accelerate on the straights, we brake going into a corner, we corner, and then we relax the brakes and accelerate again. And so we have that rhythm. The only difference is exactly how much brake do we use on certain corners, and exactly how hard or softly we have to get on the gas. So let's dive into consistency. What is it? It really means turning in at the same point lap after lap. And by that, I mean plus or minus a couple of inches, not 6 inches, not a foot, but we're talking inches here. And we talk about turning in at the same speed lap after lap. Again, plus or minus a couple of miles an hour, not 5 miles an hour, not 10 miles an hour. This is sort of the mechanical description. If I like this visual description, if your tires were paint brushes and after 10 laps, the lines you painted were the same width as the first lap. So, think about that. That's just another way of saying we're putting the car in the same place lap after lap after lap. Now, why is consistency important? Well, you've heard this before probably, but to be fast and safe, we have to be consistent. And that means using good technique. But why is it important? Well, first, it's important for safety reasons. We need to know how far below my limit as a driver am I at each corner. If I'm 5 miles an hour faster this lap than last lap, Am I going to be safe going through the corner? I don't know. That big variations like that, can lead to risks. Also, did something change on the car or the track? Again, if I'm 5 miles an hour faster and I turn in and the car does something funny like it slides, is that because I was faster, or did somebody put oil down on the track? Again, if we are consistent, then we kind of know what our margins are. We know what safety issues there are. And from a driving perspective, probably this should have been the first bullet on this slide. This is really why consistency is important, if you want to get better, because to improve, to get better, it requires a baseline. For the example on the slide, if I turn in, 2 feet sooner, did the corner get better or worse? Well, if my turn-in point is all over the place, then varying it doesn't tell me anything. I need to have that consistent baseline before I make a change. And believe it or not, I suspect you do, that's harder to achieve than one might think. So how do we improve our consistency? Well, we're going to talk about 4 techniques or tips here that can help you get more consistent. First one is just simply being aware and paying real attention to how consistent you are at turn in and other reference points. Are you always turning in at the same place, at the same speed? And we can use indexing to measure this. If you have data in the car, you can obviously use that as well. But with indexing, we can do it on track. And indexing simply means, picking a spot on the track. Could be your turn-in point, could be after you track out, and you're going to glance at that point at either the speedometer or the tach, whichever is easier, and you're going to notice the RPM or the speed. And then when you look at the next lap, you can see, whether you're faster or slower. So that technique of indexing is something every driver should have as one of the things they use, especially if they're focusing on improving a particular corner. And then speaking of focusing on one corner, each run, we want to pick 1 or at most 2 areas of priority. And that could be a specific corner. Maybe you really want to work on turn 1 at VIR, or maybe you really want to work on southbound. Whatever the corner is, pick that corner. Or perhaps it's a specific technique. It might be making sure you're very, very consistent at your turn-in point, and that you know exactly how much steering input you're providing, and exactly how slow or quickly you're turning the steering wheel. So, or it could relate to braking. My point here is we have to think about consistency, be aware of it, and then put some priority on it, especially if you aren't as consistent as you'd like to be. Now, second, I want to talk about reference points again, because we can't be consistent without having good reference points, and probably even more than you have right now. So, but it's not quite as simple as, well, this cone or this post or whatever is where my reference point is. So let's use a couple of examples. We think of our braking point as where we get on the brakes, but that's not really exactly right. So let's peel that back a little bit. It really is where I lift my right foot off the gas, right, to begin the braking. Well, not really. It's really when I tell myself to lift my right foot off the brakes. So that's why the same reference point may or may not work for different drivers, because we all interpret that reference point differently. I may tell myself to come off the gas when the front nose of my car, the front bumper, is by that reference point. You may tell yourself to take your foot off the gas when your shoulder is by that reference point. But in any case, think about your reference points as the point where you're going to tell yourself to come off the gas in this example. And that's fine. But, when somebody else describes that they brake at a different point or whatever, take that with several grains of salt, because we all interpret these reference points differently. And the same, of course, applies to turn in, although here, it really is where I begin to turn the wheel, which hopefully isn't too long after I tell myself to turn the wheel. But again, there is a bit of lag here, which we have to get used to. Now, here's a more sophisticated reference point, which you've heard me talk about before if you've listened to some of these classes. But this is the end of braking, brake release. It's the point where my right foot comes completely off the brake pedal. Nothing to do with the gas pedal. We're just talking about my foot's now off the brake pedal. So this is a great reference point to focus on if you want to get more consistent entering a corner, especially a corner you're having some trouble with, because this is a more important reference point actually than where you get on the brake point, both the brake release and the speed of the car at that brake release point. Now, some more advanced things that if you're in the Blue Run group that you might want to think about. How much brake am I on at the turn-in? Because remember, we said we want to be at the same pace and turn in at the same point. Well, we also want to, part of that being at the same pace is how much brake am I on as I'm turning in. Another, it's not exactly a reference point, but it is visually, because, the attitude of the car at the apex of the corner, is pointed in some direction. It might be pointed, outside the corner, meaning we haven't turned enough, or it might be pointed inside, meaning, we've turned, what we want to do, the amount we want. So now we can accelerate. But what is the attitude of the car at the apex is another more advanced, way to think about a reference point. But even if you're a beginning student, you can get much better at focusing on these reference points than you may think. And the best way to do that is to simply print out a bunch of track maps and from the NNJR website and write down your reference points, for each corner. Just take the map and make your notes when you come in, and do this right after you come in. As soon as you're done debriefing with your instructor, write your reference points on the map and then refine those, whatever you write down after each session. And you'll be amazed at how helpful this is, on your next session, the next day, and if when you come back to VIR. So these kinds of notes are absolutely invaluable, and I can't stress enough how important they are for students at all levels. Now, of course, consistency has a lot to do with how we use the controls in the car. And starting with the brakes, obviously, how sensitive is my foot? If I'm braking for turn 1, which is a heavy braking zone at VIR, can I consistently achieve 9 or 9.5? This is on a scale of 0 to 10, 0, no brakes, 10, full on the brakes, ABS activated. We want to brake at 9 or 9.5, going, when we first get on the brakes for turn 1. Can I consistently do that? If I can't consistently do that, my braking, where I start to brake, is going to need to be all over the place. So we need to get to the point where we can be consistent with how we use the brakes, both full on at turn 1, but also lightly at corners like South Bend, where we need much lighter brake. We don't need a heavy brake. In fact, we don't want a heavy brake. We want just a little more than a brush, like a 2, perhaps. And again, that needs to be consistent. If one time it's a 4 and the next time it's a 1, then our entry speed into South Bend is going to be all over the place. Steering, same thing. How smoothly do I wind the wheel in or unwind it? And at VIR, we have both fast corners like South Bend, which require slow hands, meaning I want to turn the wheel slowly as I turn in for South Bend. We also have slow corners like Turn 4 and Oak Tree, which we need fast hands for, especially at Oak Tree. I'm going to crank the wheel and I'm going to crank it a long ways. I'm going to do it quickly once I'm at the right point. I need to be at the right point or I'm going to be early. But when I'm at the correct turn-in point, I'm going to really crank the steering wheel. Now, string theory is mentioned here. That basically is telling us that, if we're turning the wheel, we have to be relaxing the brakes. We can't be full on the brakes and still turning the wheel, or the tire's going to run out of grip. And of course, the gas pedal is relevant here as well. Especially in a lot of modern cars with a lot of horsepower, we have to be judicious in terms of how we use that. It's not an on-off switch. The old figure of speech is, do I drive with an egg under my foot? That's the right way to think about using the gas pedal. We're going to gently squeeze that gas pedal, all the way down to the point where it's all the way down. But in some corners, that may take a little while. But even in a corner where we can get on the gas briskly, it's not a jump on the gas, it's a squeeze the gas pedal. And cornering, this is not exactly a control, but it's relevant to how we use the controls. Because in how we sense the car in the seat of the pants is important as we get better at driving. Because if we turn into the corner one time and the car and we really feel the car hooked up, so to speak, we're leaning against the bolsters in the seat, and the next time we turn in, it's not quite the same. Well, that's telling us something, right? And so getting used to what the seat of the pants feels like is a big part of getting better as we gain experience. And last but certainly not least, in terms of being consistent, is vision. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time here, but I'm going to emphasize a few key points. Keeping the eyes up and looking far ahead is always important. And this means with a glance. I'll say more about that on the next slide. Having a mental picture of the corners so that you can look around the corner, what's coming up. We need that mental picture of the corner, or we won't know what we're doing. And that's where our turn-by-turn discussion is useful. That's where, if you watch videos before you come to VIR, if you haven't been there, that will help you have that mental picture so you can indeed know what the corner looks like, even though if you can't see it. Of course, as we get to a reference point, we don't want to be looking at the turn-in cone while we're turning in. We want to be looking at that with our peripheral vision. We want to be looking at the apex cone because we look where we want the car to go. And we use scanning. So let's talk about, there are some refinements here, which, if you're an advanced student and you want to improve your vision technique, here's some things you can do. You can, try to see something new on each lap. And when you come in at the end of your session, write some of those things down on your track map. How does the sun and the shadow change what you see? That is particularly relevant at VIR. We're there in late October and the sun is low in the sky. In the morning, in your first session, you're going to see shadows in parts of the track, and doubly so late in the day in your last run. And that sun and shadow mix is going to change throughout the day. And so really does impact what the track looks like. And of course, we always want to carefully observe the track surface, for anything that's different, as well as, learning what's on camber and off camber and so on. But back to the basics of vision. This is how we want to use the eyes on track. you've seen this slide before if you've watched some of these, but I'm going to emphasize it again here because this is really, really important in terms of our technique on the track. What you see here is that the driver is in the braking zone, heavy on the brakes, approaching, but not yet at the turn-in point. And so this driver has his focus on the purple dot, which is the apex in this case. So he wants to make sure that he's going to make this apex. And so that's where his focus, and focus, by that I mean where our primary vision is centered, we're looking at that for at least a second, probably 2 seconds at a time. He has glanced further ahead, up in this yellow circle, but a glance means just that. He's glanced there. He sees there's no waving flags, there's nothing in the way, so everything's okay. So it's just a glance. And the same, by the way, glance or scan, if you prefer that, scan and glance mean the same thing here, is applied to the mirrors. We don't see the mirrors in this particular graphic, but he would have just finished scanning the mirrors as well, or glancing at the mirrors to know who's behind, so that when he gets around the corner, he knows whether or not he needs to give a pass signal. And last but not least, the turn-in point is going to be picked up out of his peripheral vision, so that he knows when he is at the turn-in point, it's time to turn. And I should have mentioned earlier, he already has his mental picture on this orange line of where the car needs to go. So this kind of way to think about driving is really important in terms of how we use the eyes. We want to focus on where the car needs to be next. So as we enter the braking zone, the focus ought to be on the turn-in point. But as we get deeper into the brake zone, now our focus moves to the apex. If the car were now, halfway to the apex, now the focus shifts up track to the track out, and so on around the track. And this really improves your ability to get the car placed where you want it and to use those reference points properly. So let me summarize this discussion about consistency. The most important thing is simply be aware of how consistent are you. Are you able to turn in at the same point within a couple of inches, at the same speed within a couple miles an hour? And if not, then focus on one corner, or focus on your turn in, or focus on your turn in speed. And if you can, use some indexing to help you get more consistent. And of course, we want to be precise with those reference points. And to do that, we need to be sensitive and smooth with the controls. And our vision is a big part of that, by looking ahead, scanning, and focusing, on the appropriate reference point. You'll find that your consistency is going to improve. So I hope you found this helpful. It's certainly coming to VIR. If you've been there before, it's a very challenging track. There are a lot of corners, a lot of reference points that we need to pay attention to, but it's a fantastic track to drive. So with that said, I'm going to pause just a minute while I get ready for the turn by turn, but in just a second, we will dive into the turn by turn. I strongly encourage you to print out the track map from a VIR that's on the website, and actually print out several of them and make notes on them when you come in from each section. If you're new to VIR, then print it out and study it so that you know the turn numbers and names. You'll see, at VIR, the names that you'll hear are, you won't hear horseshoe from very many people. You will hear NASCAR. You will certainly hear snake which is the section not even labeled here, but this section here. And you'll certainly hear climbing S's, South Bend, Oak Tree, and occasionally roller coaster and hog pen. But the turn numbers are important to know for obvious reasons. So with all of that said, we're going to shift gears and we're going to talk about VIR turn by turn. So let me get that up here. Give it a moment to show up. Okay, here we go. So VIR, famous old track, long track. Our normal disclaimer of, use your own judgment. I don't have a passing zone map here, so let me just talk about where the passing zones are in student groups. The front straight is obviously a passing zone. All passing is on the right side. This information will be in the track pack, by the way, but all passing on the right side. There is passing allowed between 1 and 2, actually between 1 and 3 in this section here. It could be on either side. Most people are going to give a pass on the left in this area. Same between NASCAR and 4, between 3 and 4, passing on the left. These are short zones, but believe it or not, you can send a car around. The next passing area is the long chute, after the snake, before the climbing S's. And this passing is mandatory on the left in this section. So all passing on the left in this section. Certainly you can send at least 1 and often 2 or even 3 cars around here. The next passing zone is between 10 and 11. This is an awkward passing zone because the line crosses the track. So you'll want to work with your instructor on that. And then, of course, the main back straight is a long straight. All passing is on the left. All passing is on the left. Even immediately exiting where you might think I want to give a pass on the right, don't do it. Track out, move the car to the right side of the track and give the pass on the left. We have the mandatory sides because if we don't do that, we've seen cases of drivers crisscrossing at very high speeds and it becomes very dangerous. Not a good idea. If you want to know more about VIR turn by turn, we have a complete written document on the website. It's hopefully pretty consistent with what I'm going to cover here, but please take a look at that as well. So we enter the track. You want to make sure you watch staging and pit out. They will let you out on the track. Pit when we pit out here, we pit out right in the back in the latter part of the front straight. Cars are going a ton. We must stay all the way track right, all the way to the apex of turn 1. So speaking of turn 1, here it is, 180-degree plus corner. If you look, you will see that the front half is tighter than the back half. So it's a heavy brake and it's a slow corner. So the line is pretty much what you'd expect, except that we probably aren't going to use the full width of the track on exit because the track comes back. And so let's take a look at that. So here's the braking zone for turn 1. Guess what? It's downhill. There's not a lot of leftover track at turn 1 past the turn-in point. So we really want to get our braking done early here. It's not a place to brake late. There's a little bit of help around the 2 marker where the track rises slightly. That'll help slow the car down some, but otherwise turn 1 is totally flat. There is no banking to help us. So it's a case where, again, the deck is stacked against us. It's a slow corner. We need to slow down. Here you see the turn-in arrow on the left, and that works for most drivers. And we want to turn and run right along the apex curb for quite a long distance. In fact, we just want to hug that curb all the way to the end of it. And the reason is that it's a long corner and we have to get quite a ways around before we can think about getting on the gas to do anything more than then maintain the speed that we have. So if we can't use any acceleration until we get to the end of this curve. Here you see why we don't use the whole track at track out. You can see that the track actually comes back after turn one. So it effectively makes this substantially sharper than a 180-degree turn. And so most people are going to track out mid-track and then look for and look up track to turns 2 and 3. So notice the direction of the slide here. I'm matching the track map. We've gone through turn 1. Now we're coming back. So the line here goes from top to bottom of the slide. So the way we drive from the exit of turn 1 to the turn in at turn 3 is one arc. And you can see it's a pretty gentle arc, almost looks like a straight line on the slide. It's not straight, but it can be driven as an arc on the gas. This is a place where we can accelerate quite briskly. And it is a passing zone, as I said before, on the left. As we're exiting turn 1 and we start to head up the middle of the track, we want to be paying attention to these trees on the left. And it's hard to see here because it's kind of hidden by the trees, but the tech barn, which is the small building, as opposed to the tower building here or the food stand building, both of which are larger, we're looking for the small building. And as we come past the trees, now you can see it more clearly. But as soon as you see it coming through the trees, just drive right toward it. It's a perfect reference and puts us right where we want to be headed into turn 3. The apex of turn 2 is not critical. Some people stay wide and make the arc slightly wider, and some people just go right past the apex, like is shown here. Either one's fine, but we want to get to track right entering turn 3. So the curbing we were aiming for when we were aiming at the tech shed is this right side curb that we want to run along. We're going to brake coming into this, and we want to run along this, and we're going to turn at the end of that curb for turn 3, also known as NASCAR. Relatively fast corner, but we've been going pretty quick. We've been on the gas. That's why we have to brake coming in here. So the brake zone, is before the car is in this photo, but we're still on the brakes as we approach the turn-in point here. And we're going to turn in right at the end of that curbing on the right. And we're going to run right along the apex of 3 for 10 or 15 feet. You're going to hear that on a number of corners. It's not, the apex isn't a point. It's a distance that we drive along. And you see we have a short chute in front of us that leads us over to turn, they call it turns 4A and 4B, left-hand turn being 4A, the right-hand turn being 4B. We compromise what we do in 4A to set up 4B in the section that follows. So we're braking for turn 4 because we can be on the gas hard through and through turn 3 and down the chute. And we're going to turn in, and instead of tracking out like you normally would, we're going to aim to have the car on the left side of the track here, or at least the left half of the track as we exit turn 4A. So in other words, we're going to apex the corner, but then we're not going to track out very far at all. We're going to go about 1 car length, a car length and a half past the end of this curb, and then we're going to turn for 4B. So as we exit 4A, we're really focused on the apex here of 4B. This is really critical to nail this apex, because from this point here, about where the car is in this photo, we're going to turn the wheel to the right and make 1 arc that's going to take us exactly where we want to go through 4B and to set up turn 5. So here you can see the sealer patch in this photo, where the line is, right? It's creating that arc that is going to set us up for 5A and 5B. But 5A is the critical part here, as I'll show in a moment. So here's that little tiny chute where we're driving that arc. That arc is going to take us to the outside of the track here. We don't want to get, completely to the outside curbing, but we want to be up almost against it as we approach turn 5. Now we can see the apex of 5A here, and this becomes our focus. We may need to adjust the arc slightly, to get the car in there and to get it straight, as I'm going to show in a moment. Sometimes that means a breathe of the throttle or a little bit of steering adjustment, to make sure the arc is taking us where we want to be. The critical part here is when we're at the apex of 5A that you see here, we want to be looking at the bridge. It's hard to see in this photo, but the bridge that enters the track is in the middle of my highlight here. And we want the car looking at that bridge. If we're looking at the trees or to the left of the trees, we have not made the corner and we cannot get on the gas. So this is basically a heavy acceleration zone as soon as we get the car straight here. But if the car isn't straight, we can't get on the gas. And if we do get on the gas, we're going to be in trouble. So very important to get the car straight at this part of the track. Once we do, we can accelerate through the snake, and it's pretty straightforward. We do want to pay a lot of respect to the curb in turn 5B. It's a tall, nasty curb. If we hit it wrong, it's not going to do good things. The signature feature, or one of them anyway, of VIR, the climbing S's. And, turn numbers are sort of irrelevant here, but you can see it's a complex section. The key, or the way to make sure that you execute the climbing S's safely and quickly is the entry. And I'm going to emphasize how we do that in a moment. You see the entry line drawn here. So how do we do that? Well, as we approach the climbing S's, we've just gone under the bridge here that we talked about a minute ago. We're going to turn the car very gently to the left once we get to about where the end of this road on the right ends. And we're just going to bend it. We're accelerating at this point. We're not going to brake. We're going to stay on the gas, and we're just going to bend the car slightly so that we can go straight along this curbing on the left. And I want you to pay a special attention to the white line and the fact that the white line is straight past the curb here. We're going to drive right along that white line. We're going to follow that white line. We're not going to turn until the end of that white line. And so that's about here in this photo. And the reason we do that is there's a hill on this next S. And if we do what we just described, we hit that hill square on, and the car feels good, lots of grip, we can be on the gas, everything's nice. If we're not lined up that way and we hit the hill at an angle, sooner or later, that's going to cause a problem, especially if we try to go too fast. So it's very important to get this first section done properly. Once we do that, this section is just a blast because we're going to apex kind of the end of this 8A curb that you see here, and then we're going to aim kind of the middle or second half of the 8B curb on the left, and then the middle of the curb on turn 9 at the top. There's a great rhythm through here, and it is very fast, which makes it both fun but extremely challenging and deserves a great deal of respect. So immediately after turn 9 comes South Bend, turn 10, the fastest corner on the track, and in my view, the most dangerous corner on the track if it's not driven correctly. So how do we drive South Bend? Well, first, as we exit turn 9, there's a little bit of a rise, and then the road settles down, which is where the car is in this photo. As soon as the car settles down coming over that rise, we want to use the brakes. This is going to be somewhere between a brush brake and a light brake, depending on how much horsepower you have, how fast you're going. But the key thing here is we're going to brake in a straight line. We're not going to brake at all, after we turn in for this corner. So we want to get the braking done in a straight line so that when we turn in, which our turn in is as soon as we can see the beginning of the apex curb, we want to be getting our foot on the gas pedal, not on the floor, but we want enough gas to settle the car, and so that the car is settled and we can manage the line through the corner. This is a very fast corner. This is a case for slow hands to turn the car into a fast corner, and it's a case we're using light brake release and initially light gas to balance the car, get it set up, and eventually squeeze the gas pedal to keep it planted. The apex here is the early part of the curb. One of the nasty things about turn 10 is that it goes off camber, right where you'd like to have more banking at track out. And you can almost see that in this photo, that it does go off camber. So that catches people out if they're not paying attention. If we stay on the right line and we manage the gas properly, this corner is a lot of fun. If you ever do get in trouble, just drive it off. There's a huge field on the right here. There's all kinds of room to drive off. The mistake people make in this corner is they get in too fast or too early, and they, instead of driving off, they lift. And then you hit the tire wall that's over here, and you hit it hard. So, because you're going so fast here. So lots of room to drive off, a lot of fun to drive. Most people who make that mistake are not students, but that's why this corner deserves great respect. Now, another signature complex at VIR, Oak Tree, turns 11 and 12. And notice how the second half, turn 12, is tighter than the first half. So that means we can carry some speed through 11. We then have to brake to set up for 12 for Oak Tree itself. So we have a nice brake zone and into a hill. So we don't have to brake as much as we think coming into 11 because it is relatively quick and this hill is going to slow us down anyway. So we turn in, kind of at the middle or a little bit past the middle of the curb. The key thing here is to have the eyes up and focused on this curbing on the outside of 12, because we want the car lined up alongside this curb. And ideally, we're going to be on some brake here, not heavy, but enough brake to help the car turn, because this is a very sharp turn, very slow turn. This is a case of fast hands. Once we get to where we want to turn, we need to crank the wheel. This is a sharp turn. And we're going to crank the wheel and be patient to get on the gas, because again, it's a sharp corner. The car takes some time to turn, and we have to give it that time. The key thing here, by the time we're approaching the apex, like you see here, we need to be looking at this flag station. If we're still looking over here, then we haven't turned enough. If we're looking here or to the right, great. Now we can begin to feed on some gas and accelerate. This is an extremely challenging complex, but very rewarding when you get it right. Track out is the last half of the curve here. Okay, now notice again direction. Now we're going from the left of the slide to the right. This is, the roller coaster at the end of the back straight. And we're going to see another compromise corner here. We're going to compromise 14 to set up 15. But what does that look like? First, this is the braking zone at the end of the back straight. And notice the hill. Again, that helps us slow down. But the road does turn, or bend, I should say, left, at the top of this hill here. And for that reason, as we get about to this point, we just gently turn the car, not much at all, and certainly not enough that should affect what we're doing with the braking. The reason we do that is we want to be on the left half of the track as we come over that little rise to set up our turn for turn 14. Turn 14, we're going to just basically follow this curbing. We're going to pick up the curbing someplace early on. We're just going to follow it, because when we get to the end of it, that's where we're going to turn in for 15. This is another slow corner, and we have to be patient. But the nice thing, if we do this right, we get to this point, we just turn and go. We turn the car to the left, we start squeezing the gas, and away we go, because this compression here you see in front of us when the road flattens out really sticks the car down. And yes, we're going to apex the middle of the curb, but at this point, we got a ton of grip and we can accelerate down this chute that's in front of us. Now, this chute leads us to one of the most important complexes on the track, because this sets up the front straight. And this is 16A, 16B. And what you can't see on the slide here is that the road falls away dramatically here. From the point of 16A down past 16B, we're going down a very steep hill. Feels like the car is falling off the edge of the world at this point. So here's the outside turn-in curbing, if you want to think about it that way, for 16A at the end of that chute. So we're going to need to brake, but what we want to do is whether we may begin braking before we bend the car in for 16A, but we want to brake all the way up into this little rise that you see on the left here. There's a little rise there that can help slow us down. And we do have to slow down to set this complex up. Basically, what we want to do is follow the last half of the curbing on the left here. And again, we're compromising this turn to set up the one that follows. So we're going to follow this curbing to the end, and then we're going to turn. And here you can get a sense for how steep the hill is that we're navigating at this point. So we're going to turn in to the right at the end of this curbing that you see in the slide. And here's what it looks like going down the hill. There's the 16B apex. We're basically on the gas at this point, depending how much power you have. We're certainly going to be feeding gas on coming down the hill. As we get past 16B, we can feed on a lot of power. We do get compression that helps us here, but the road does come back. So if you have a high-powered car, you have to use the gas judiciously here until you can make sure there's enough road to use it. In a lower-powered car, we can be using most of the power pretty quickly through here. And it is important, as I said, it feeds onto the front straight. I don't have a great picture of 17. One note about 17 is that there's no need necessarily to be in on the apex on the right. Many drivers find it's just as comfortable to be a car width or so off that apex. But the track out curbings here at 16B and 17 are not that friendly. So they're not places we don't really want to use the last inch on the outside of these corners. A terrifically fun complex, once we get it right. So just some notes to summarize. Turn 1 is slower than it looks. So is Oak Tree. So is turn 4. You might pick up a theme here. Turn 10, South Bend deserves great respect. And these connected corners, like the complex that begins at 4, like the one at the end of the back straight, like the one that feeds onto the front straight, they require patience. There's a reason why we want to set it up, because we're setting up the fast section that follows. But if we get impatient, then we're going to screw that up. Look forward to seeing you at VIR. And please, if you have any questions or comments, you feel free to look me up at VIR. Feel free to send me an email. It's Gilbert, the number 4, @rcn.com. Everyone have a great day. I look forward to seeing you at VIR.